I always believed I had been born alone into this world. No parents waiting somewhere. No family with open arms. No one who stayed. The only stable presence in my childhood was Mr. Harlan Westbrook, a wealthy businessman who paid for my education and my living expenses without ever making me feel truly welcome. Because of him, I grew up inside a world I never belonged to, living like a shadow at the edge of someone else's life. His daughter, Elena Westbrook, was 3 years older than me. She was sharp, composed, and effortlessly beautiful in the way that certain people are, the kind that makes you forget what you were about to say. I fell for her quietly, slowly, the way young people fall for things they can never have. By the time I got accepted into Belmont University on my own merit, through years of studying when everyone else slept, I had already convinced myself that being near her was enough. For 4 years, I lived in the guest house on the Westbrook estate. I worked part-time jobs through rain and winter, studied until my eyes burned, and spent every spare moment making myself useful to Elena. I cooked her meals, waited up when she worked late, and kept her routines running so smoothly that she barely noticed I was doing it. But no matter how much I gave, she always looked at me the same way. I was her little brother. A familiar piece of furniture. Something she was used to having around. Then her future was arranged the way rich families arrange things, with spreadsheets and strategy instead of love. Her marriage was negotiated to lock in a business alliance, and she walked into it without a single spark of joy. The marriage was never happy. Elena buried herself in her work, and her husband buried himself in another woman. I watched it from the side, helpless and heartbroken, and eventually I stopped watching. After graduation, I packed my bag and left New York. That was when my birth parents finally found me. I had spent my entire life believing I was an orphan. The truth, when it arrived, was worse than the lie. I walked into a family that had already replaced me with someone else. His name was Adrian Vale. He was adopted, close to my age, and surgically charming in a way that made your skin crawl if you paid close enough attention. In public, he was soft-spoken and gentle. Behind closed doors, he was a predator with perfect instincts. He knew exactly how to cry, exactly when to seem helpless, exactly how to reframe every situation so that he was always the injured one. He worked on my family for a full year before he finished me off. By the time he accused me of selling corporate secrets to a rival company, no one was willing to hear my side. The groundwork had been laid perfectly. Every small misunderstanding, every moment I had acted out of frustration or confusion, had been quietly catalogued and used to paint me as unstable and untrustworthy. My own sister, Genevieve, who was a lawyer, entered a guilty plea on my behalf and waived my right to appeal without flinching. Prison was cold, gray, and silent in the worst way. I waited for someone to come. I caused trouble trying to get their attention, hoping someone would ask questions. No one did. No one visited. No one called. Then, on Adrian's orders, an accident was arranged inside the block. A sharpened piece of metal found my neck. I bled out on the floor of a prison corridor, and by the time they moved me, it was already too late. My last thought was not anger, not grief. It was exhaustion. If there was anything after this, I wanted none of them in it. Not the family that discarded me, not the woman I had loved for years who never looked twice. I wanted quiet. I wanted a life where no one needed anything from me and I needed nothing from anyone. Then I woke up. Not in a hospital. Not in the afterlife. Back inside my own body in the summer. Before my senior year at Belmont University, with the sun coming through a window I recognized and a clock on the wall reading a time that made no sense. For a while, I thought I was dreaming. But the memories were too precise. Too sharp. I remembered every shift I had worked, every face I had recognized, every humiliation in perfect sequence. I was back and I remembered everything. I made my decision before the week was out. I would finish my degree, leave New York the day after graduation, and never return. In my previous life, I had gone back to the group home in Denver after leaving the city, and that was how my birth family had eventually tracked me down. This time, I would cut the thread before it could connect. I had no interest in Washington, D.C., where the Prescott family lived, and I had no interest in staying in New York, which held nothing but monuments to my own suffering. To disappear properly, I needed money. Real money. The kind that let you vanish without leaving a trail of desperation behind you. My bank account held just over $7,000, everything I had earned from internships and weekend jobs. Then I remembered something useful. In my previous life, I had worked at a sports bar during the World Cup season. I had watched every game, tracked every score, argued over every result. And my reborn mind, With its strange clarity, remembered every single one of those results with complete precision. Every winner. Every upset. Every final scoreline. I downloaded a betting app, linked my account, and placed my first bet with steady hands. Win after win came in exactly as I remembered. My balance grew in ways that made the screen feel unreal. By the end of the tournament, I had accumulated just under $300 million. The bank manager began calling me personally. He offered private wealth management, premium investment portfolios, and every service money unlocks. I accepted a few of the investment products quietly and declined the rest. That summer, Elena was running on no sleep. She was spearheading Sterling Industries' push to reach the top 50 corporations in New York, and she was rarely home before midnight. I knew that season well from my first life. I knew how much pressure she was carrying. One evening, her birthday arrived. I spent the afternoon cooking a full spread of her favorite dishes and baked a cake from scratch. I did it out of habit more than anything. This would be the last birthday I would ever mark for her. After graduation, I would be gone, and her birthdays would be nothing more than numbers passing on a page. By 11:59 that night, the doorbell finally rang. I opened the door to find a man helping Elena inside. His name was Marcus Reed, her college classmate and now a business partner. In my previous life, I knew exactly who he was and what he would become. A man who was also unlucky in love, respectable on the surface, and slightly too smooth at the wrong moments. I said nothing to him. I took Elena from his arm and closed the door. He stood outside for a moment, caught completely off guard. Nearly got his nose clipped by the door as it shut in his face. Inside, Elena was not elegant when drunk. I helped her to her room, removed her shoes, pulled a blanket over her, and left a glass of honey and lemon water on her nightstand for when she woke up thirsty. Just as I always had. The next morning, she came downstairs carrying the empty glass, found the room spotless, the trash already taken out, and the food gone. I was walking out with my backpack on. "Morning," I said, and kept moving. She watched me go with a look I had not seen on her before. Something between confusion and discomfort. She had been so consumed by work all summer that she had barely noticed how much I had pulled back. She probably assumed I was annoyed because she missed dinner. She had completely forgotten, again, that yesterday was actually her birthday. Her official documents showed a different date, one her family had adjusted years ago so she could enter school early. A few days later, she decided to come to the university at noon and take me to lunch. It was her version of making it up to me without saying the words. When she arrived and found me leaving a lecture hall, she also found 3 girls waiting to ask for my contact, and a fourth, strikingly beautiful, standing directly in front of me in the middle of confessing her feelings. Something shifted in Elena's expression. It was quick, barely visible, like a shadow passing over still water. But it was there. An uncomfortable tightness in her chest she did not yet have a name for. She walked over and looped her arm through mine. I pulled away on instinct, then stopped when I saw her face. "Elena, what are you doing here?" "Taking you to lunch," she said simply. "What is all this?" "Nothing. Just classmates." "Don't worry." I steered her away before the situation could get messy. We found a small diner off campus and ordered quietly. Both of us avoided talking about the night before. She asked if I had found an internship yet, and offered me a position at Sterling Industries without much build-up. I refused immediately. In my previous life, that internship was the exact chain of events that led me back to my birth family. It was at Sterling Industries that I had crossed paths with Genevieve Prescott, who had recognized me by a crescent-shaped scar on my hand and a small heart-shaped birthmark behind my ear. She had been with me the day I got lost as a child, and the guilt of that had never left her. I had no desire to walk that path again. I told Elena the university had already placed me with another company. A lie. She accepted it without pressing, though I caught her studying me for a moment longer than usual. Something about my manner was different, and she could feel it even if she could not name it. She had spent so many years assuming I would always be there. Now, for the first time, she was not entirely sure. I used the internship cover to spend my time doing something far more useful. Coburn Wharf was a historic district tucked inside the city, the kind of place where old cobblestone streets wound between buildings that had been standing for over a century. Tourists wandered through it. Small shops and cafes lined every corner. I had spent time here in my previous life and remembered it well. It was popular, well located, and full of people who had no connection to the Westbrook or Prescott worlds. It was perfect. I spent $130 million buying 5 large interconnected courtyard buildings and 6 storefronts attached to them. The storefronts I kept leased out immediately. They brought in a steady $120,000 per month. The courtyards were my real project. My degree was in architectural design, and I drew the plans myself. 4 of the courtyards would be knocked through and converted into a boutique hotel. The 5th would be my private residence. The concept was a fusion of historic exterior and modern interior, keeping the original stone facades exactly as they were while gutting everything inside and rebuilding it to a standard that had no comparison in the district. The renovation took a full year and cost me another $40 million. What came out the other side was something I was genuinely proud of. The hotel had 4 elegant courtyards with high ceilings, floor-to-ceiling glass, and locally commissioned artwork on every surface. 30 deluxe rooms, 10 family suites, and 6 luxury suites, each one designed differently. A cafe and restaurant run by professional chefs. A gift shop. A pool hidden inside the innermost courtyard, invisible from the street. My private residence sat separately, connected through a single internal passage with the same quality in every detail. I bought a smaller courtyard nearby and turned it into staff accommodation with its own cafeteria. I had already recruited a management team with real experience, and they ran the day-to-day operations without needing me at every step. When the hotel was ready, I listed it quietly on every major travel platform and waited. The location alone was enough to drive traffic. The design did the rest. Rooms priced at over $2,000 per night filled faster than I expected. Within weeks, certain suites had a waiting list. The cafe became a favorite among locals and tourists alike. During my final year at Belmont, I split my time between lectures in Coburn Wharf, using the internship story to keep Elena from asking too many questions. I won another $130 million through sports betting before my knowledge of future results ran dry. It did not matter. By then, I had bought another dozen storefronts across the district, adding $300,000 per month to my income. Even if the hotel ran at a loss, the rental income from my properties would sustain everything indefinitely. I donated $10 million to the group home in Denver where I had grown up, then told the old director I was moving abroad permanently. It was a deliberate misdirection. In my previous life, the Prescott family's investigators had found me through the home. This time, I let them searching the wrong continent. I allowed myself a small, quiet smile at that. I had everything I needed. Income, a home I had built with my own plans, and a life no one could take from me. I wanted peace. I had been careless with hope once before, and it had cost me everything. This time, I would not make the same mistake. Graduation came on a clear morning. I put on my cap and gown, took the group photos without much feeling, and was heading toward the exit when a group of girls from my department called my name and asked for a photo. I was about to refuse, and then I saw her. Elena was standing in the distance, watching. In my previous life, she had not come. In all the times I had imagined this day, she had never been in the picture. And yet here she was, in a blazer and silk blouse, watching me from across the crowd with an expression I could not quite read. Something warm moved in my chest without asking permission. I agreed to the photos. She had not been told about the ceremony. We had barely spoken in the past year. I had stopped making her breakfast every morning. The table in the guest house had been empty since the start of the semester. Christmas had passed without me. Mr. Westbrook, noticing the change in me, had spoken to me privately and seemed quietly relieved that I appeared to be moving forward. He offered continued financial support. I declined politely. Elena, for her part, had started to feel the absence in ways she could not explain to herself. I was always there, and then I was not. The shape of her mornings changed. Small things she had not noticed while they were happening became noticeable only after they stopped. She was too busy to examine it directly, but it sat at the back of her mind like something unfinished. Then she overheard some junior staff talking about Belmont's graduation and remembered me without meaning to. She left for the campus before she could talk herself out of it. When she arrived and saw me surrounded by bright, laughing young women, a familiar discomfort moved through her. It was the same feeling from that afternoon in the campus diner, the same tightness she still had not named. She walked over and slipped her arm through mine with the ease of someone who had done it 100 times. One of the girls looked up sharply. "And who are you?" Elena smiled without effort. "I'm Ethan's sister. I came to watch him graduate." "Oh, you're that sister," the girl said, her tone changing immediately. "He talks about you all the time. You're even lovelier than he said." Elena's smile deepened. Does he brag about me? Constantly, another girl added. He's always saying how impressive you are. I tried to steer Elena away, but before I could, she had already agreed to be in the photos. With Caleb's help, we took several pictures using both phones. In every frame, Elena's arm around me looked completely natural, and something about that made it harder to look at. Caleb knew my full history. He probably thought he was giving me a small gift. I was grateful but said nothing about my plans. The day after graduation, just as in my previous life, Elena left for a business trip to Washington, D.C. I called Mr. Westbrook, said my goodbyes, and took a car to the airport. I picked up a one-way ticket to Paris under my real name, boarded the flight, and landed in France the following morning. From Paris, I bought a used car that did not require an immediate registration change, drove it toward the border, and found the smuggling route I had heard described by an inmate in my first life. Just as he had said, the route was blind at that hour. No patrols. No cameras. I crossed back into the United States on foot, abandoned the car on the French side, and within a day was moving again. Using a second identity I had quietly built during the hotel renovation, purchased on the black market through connections made during the period, I bought a Range Rover and drove back to New York. The whole journey took just over a week. When I finally pulled into Coburn Wharf and parked outside the district, I felt something settle in me. I walked through the narrow streets to my private courtyard, unlocked the door, and stood inside the home I had built from scratch. Quiet. Mine. Untouched by any of them. I never expected Elena to cut her business trip short. When she returned to New York and found the guesthouse empty, she ignored her father's concerns and hired investigators. Around the same time, the Prescott family in Washington had already begun their own search, tracing my trail back to the Denver group home, which eventually connected them to Elena's inquiry. Their teams pulled resources. With that kind of money and reach behind the effort, the digital trail I thought I had buried was uncovered quickly. The sports betting winnings, the property purchases, the hotel listing, all of it pointed back to Coburn Wharf. My misdirection had bought me almost nothing. When Elena and the Prescott family arrived at my hotel 3 months after graduation, I tried to slip out through the rear entrance. Elena caught me before I reached the back door. She looked exhausted. Not the sharp, contained tiredness of someone who works too hard. This was something deeper, something that had been eating at her for weeks. Her composure was intact, but underneath it, she was fraying. In 2 lifetimes, she was still the only person I had ever truly loved. Even now, even knowing better, I felt the pull of that. The explanation for her state came out slowly. Elena had been suffering from nightmares since the night of graduation. Not vague, unsettling dreams, but vivid, sequential, detailed visions of a life she had never lived. She dreamed of a version of me returning to a family in Washington, being welcomed briefly, then slowly destroyed from the inside by a brother who was never a real brother at all. She dreamed of me in prison, of her trying to visit and being turned away. She dreamed of learning about her husband's affair during that same visit. She dreamed of me dying before she could do anything. She did not understand where the dreams were coming from. Later, I would come to my own conclusion. My rebirth had not left me entirely unchanged. And the bond between us, built over years of my quiet devotion, seemed to have carried something across with me. A residue. An echo. Whatever it was, the boundary of whatever allowed me to remember my previous life had thinned enough to bleed into hers. Not fully. Not clearly. But enough that she was seeing fragments of what I knew. She could not explain it. But she could not dismiss it either, especially when the dream started matching reality in ways that made her afraid. Her husband's family had begun pushing a business merger with Sterling Industries. Her father was considering it. In the dream, that alliance had ended in her complete destruction, with her husband and his mistress dismantling her life while the family she trusted stood by and let it happen. When the Prescott family arrived at her door looking for me, Elena stopped treating the nightmares as anxiety and started treating them as a warning. I stood before my 3 biological sisters without expression. Genevieve Prescott, the eldest. The one who had been with me the day I got lost. The one who had filed my guilty plea in my previous life without looking me in the eye. Then Veronica Prescott, and the youngest, Madeline. I confirmed nothing. I denied nothing. I answered their questions with silence and let them interpret it however they chose. After several days, I noticed them collecting items I had touched. A cup, a pen, a tissue. Within 48 hours, the results came back from a private laboratory. The report confirmed what the birthmark and the scar on my hand had already told them. I was Ethan Prescott, the only son of their family missing for over 2 decades. The news sent joy through the Prescott household. The one person who did not celebrate was Adrian Vale. He had spent years building a position inside that family, quietly replacing the ghost of the lost son with his own presence. He had been days away from being formally installed in a role at Prescott Corporation when the real heir reappeared. I already knew what he would try. In my first life, the day I was brought home, the family had prepared a welcome banquet for me. Adrian had thrown himself from a second-floor window on the same afternoon, breaking his leg and absorbing every drop of attention and sympathy the family had to give. My parents spent the night at the hospital. My sister stayed with him. The banquet was never rescheduled. This time, I refused to go to Washington at all. I refused to give him a stage. Even with the DNA confirmation in hand, I would not acknowledge them as family. My sisters returned to Coburn Wharf with the report. I looked at the document, set it on the table, and said nothing. They had watched me die without remorse. Genevieve had filed that plea herself. Whatever guilt they were feeling now, it had arrived 20 years too late. Elena, who was watching all of this from the side, was the one who began to understand most clearly. She saw how I looked at them. She saw the past in my eyes, even though she could not name it precisely. She began to piece together what her dreams had been telling her. My birth parents and Adrian eventually came to New York and checked into my hotel. They were not permitted into my private courtyard, and that boundary held. Only Elena came and went freely, having used her characteristic directness to install herself in my home within 2 days of finding me. At the hotel, Adrian attempted his usual performance. Soft voice, confused expression. Just the right amount of vulnerability to make himself look like the real victim in a complicated situation. But Coburn Wharf was my territory. Every public area was covered by cameras. So was my private residence. When he arranged what was meant to look like an accident, positioning himself to appear injured by my hands in a blind corridor, every second of it was captured from 3 separate angles. He ended up in the hospital for a week with no visitors. The Prescott family paid for the best care available, but no one came to see him. His methods worked by controlling perception, and in a place where I had laid all the groundwork, he had no perception to control. Everything he did only pushed the family further from him and deeper into a sense of obligation toward me. Not long after, Adrian left Coburn Wharf in disgrace. My father and Genevieve returned to Washington. Veronica followed. But my mother, whose grief over losing me had never fully healed, refused to go. Adopting Adrian had been her way of trying to patch a wound she could not name. Now that she had found me, leaving felt impossible. Madeline stayed, too, which I did not expect. In my previous life, she had been Adrian's most loyal defender, quick to accuse and slow to question. Now she hovered at the edges of my days, uncertain and quiet. As if she was trying to figure out how to reach someone who had already decided the bridge was down. My mother and Elena spent a great deal of time together, drinking tea and talking. Gradually, Elena began to understand things about my past that she had never considered. The stories my mother shared revealed what my childhood had actually looked like, not the polished version visible from the outside, but the real one. The loneliness. The effort. The years of loving Elena from a respectful distance while she looked straight through me. Elena listened without interrupting. In the weeks that followed, I noticed small changes in her. She watched me more closely. She paid attention to the way I moved through the hotel, the way the staff here trusted me, the way people in the district recognized me and came to me without hesitation. She saw a version of me she had never bothered to look for before. She started appearing in the courtyard more often than she needed to. She asked to sit in the cafe when I was working. She found reasons to stay later than made sense. She started picking up on the specific way I made her tea, slightly stronger than most people liked, exactly how she preferred it, and the fact that I had never once asked her how she took it because I had always already known. One evening, she said my name instead of calling me little brother for the first time. I noticed but did not comment. Then her former suitor appeared. His name was Daniel Forsyth. His family had been in negotiations with the Westbrook estate over a business alliance for several months, and the marriage proposal was the intended seal on that deal. Elena had stood him up at every arranged meeting. Her father, knowing where she was and sensing something shifting in her, had stopped pressing. Daniel did not take well to being ignored. He was the kind of man who had been successful enough for long enough to confuse desire with entitlement. After finding Elena's photograph in a business profile, he became fixated. He tracked her to Coburn Wharf and staged a public proposal at the entrance to my hotel on a Saturday morning, surrounded by tourists with phones out. The video was online within minutes. I was inside when Elena grabbed my arm and pulled me out to use me as a barrier. Standing there, looking at Daniel Forsyth, remembering exactly what kind of man he was. The affair he kept, the life he gave Elena in another timeline, the years of cold endurance he had survived because of that arranged marriage, something went flat and cold inside me. He was doing this in front of my hotel. I shoved him. He shoved back. I hit him twice on the jaw, clean and deliberate. He threatened me and then stepped back when the local security guards appeared. The guards knew me. Everyone in the district knew me. I was the quiet man who owned most of the good properties in Coburn Wharf, kept rents fair, fixed problems without making noise, and sent over coffee on cold mornings without being asked. When I needed them, they came. They saw Daniel off the premises. I sent several cartons of cigarettes to the guardhouse afterward. Elena stood beside me the whole time and said nothing until the crowd had gone. Then she looked at me in a way that was different from every look that had come before it. Not with the comfortable familiarity of someone who assumed I would always be nearby. Something more uncertain. More searching. The incident went viral, naturally. The Prescott name, the Sterling name, and my name were attached to various versions of the story within hours. By the next morning, most of it had been scrubbed from the internet. I knew it was the work of the Prescott family. They had that kind of reach. I did not thank them. I simply noted it. In the weeks after the confrontation, Daniel's harassment of Elena continued more quietly but no less persistently. His men appearing near her building, his name showing up in her schedule through manufactured meetings. Elena moved through it with her usual controlled composure, but I could see it wearing on her. She started spending almost every evening at the hotel. She argued with Madeline constantly over which of them had the right to call herself my sister. Watching Madeline grow frustrated while Elena held her ground without raising her voice gave me a quiet satisfaction I did not fully examine. One day, Elena asked me to come with her to a friend's wedding as her driver and her date. She phrased it as a practical request, but did not quite meet my eyes when she asked. I agreed. That evening, at the reception, I noticed a waiter moving too deliberately toward Elena's table. I recognized the look of someone executing a specific task rather than doing their job. A moment before he reached her with a champagne flute, I leaned forward and knocked a small tray off the adjacent table. Glasses shattered. The champagne in her hand spilled before it touched her lips. Daniel's men had been watching from outside. They followed me to the car. By the time they were finished, I had a broken rib, a laceration above my eyebrow, and a head injury serious enough that I was unconscious for 2 full days. When I woke up, the entire Prescott family was in the corridor outside my room. Within 26 hours of my admission, the Prescott Corporation had initiated a hostile acquisition of Daniel Forsyth's family company. The attack was efficient and total. By the end of the week, his business was bankrupt. Elena's father had personally gone to the police with evidence that had been quietly gathered for months. And Daniel's arrest followed that same afternoon. The charges were severe enough that his legal team had nothing to work with. Elena did not leave my side for those 2 days. She talked to me while I was unconscious, as if she was afraid that stopping would mean losing me. I could not hear her, but Caleb later told me she had barely eaten. When I finally opened my eyes, she looked at me with an exhaustion that went deeper than the sleepless nights. She gave me a small, tired smile. Then she stood up, and her legs gave out. I caught her before she hit the floor. After that, something between us was finished and something else began. I stopped using the word sister. She started using my name, just my name, nothing attached to it. The late nights became a habit. I bought a racing bike that was far too fast for the narrow streets of the district, and Elena made it her personal right to ride on it with me. She would hold on tighter than was necessary, and I would take the corner slowly, and neither of us mentioned it. The hotel cafe stayed open later than it needed to on those evenings, and the staff had long since learned not to rush us. In Washington, meanwhile, Adrian made his final move. Veronica, distrusting him for months, had already suggested installing hidden cameras throughout the Prescott Corporation headquarters. The board had agreed. Within weeks of the installation, the cameras captured Adrian stealing confidential data, not once but on 4 separate occasions, each one intended for sale to a competitor. There was no version of events in which he could explain it away. He was arrested, formally disowned, and sent to prison. The family flew back to New York for the second time, this time without a plan to persuade me and without Adrian casting a shadow over everything. Genevieve came to Coburn Wharf and sat in the Courtyard Cafe across from me for almost an hour without speaking. Then she said, very quietly, that she knew what she had done in another life, even though she could not explain how she knew it. That she had spent months trying to understand a recurring dream that felt more like a memory. I looked at her and said nothing. She did not ask for forgiveness. She only asked if she could sit there. I let her. The Prescott Corporation moved its New York headquarters into a cluster of connected townhouses in Rivergate Estates, a private development that backed directly onto Coburn Wharf. They had the architects install a private gate in the new surrounding wall, one that opened onto a path leading to the rear entrance of my hotel. My father came to the hotel bar one evening and ordered a whiskey and said almost nothing. My mother came every day and drank tea with Elena and asked me endless questions about things I had done and places I had been and whether I had been warm enough through the winters and whether I had eaten properly. I answered what I felt like answering and let the rest sit in silence. I did not go to Washington. I never went to Washington. But slowly, without announcement, I stopped refusing every knock on the door. A full year passed. Elena proposed to me on an evening in late autumn. Sitting at the table in my private courtyard with the last of the season's light coming through the stone archway behind her. She did not make a performance of it. She looked at me steadily and said that she had spent a long time looking straight through me and that she had no intention of spending whatever was left of her life making the same mistake. I said yes. Our wedding became the largest event Coburn Wharf had ever hosted. The district filled with guests, photographers, and well-wishers crowding the narrow streets. It was everywhere online the same evening. At first, the story framed it as an unlikely match, the quiet man who married into old money. Then someone released the Prescott family connection, confirmed by the family directly. The narrative shifted overnight. The long-lost heir returned and married, finally claimed by two families at once. I knew the Prescotts had released that information deliberately. It was their way of putting their name on me in public, the closest thing to an announcement they could make without my explicit permission. I did not push back. My quiet acceptance seemed to stun them into stillness for a moment. Then they understood it for what it was, not forgiveness, not full acceptance, but something like an open door left ajar. Their surprise softened into relief and then into something that looked, cautiously, like happiness. A week after the wedding, I brought Elena to the Rivergate townhouses for the first time. We sat down with my parents and together we served them tea. It was a small gesture, an old one that carried more meaning in silence than I could have put into words. Outside, the streets of Coburn Wharf were busy with the usual evening crowd. The cafe lights were on. The hotel was full. The district carried on in the way it always had, warm and unhurried, indifferent to the history of the people moving through it. I had built this place with my own hands and my own money, out of nothing but the memory of a life I refused to repeat. I had earned my peace one decision at a time. And sitting there, with Elena's hand resting quietly beside mine, I finally understood that peace and love did not have to be opposites. That wanting to be left alone had been the beginning, not the end. I had just needed to arrive here in my own time.